Pick.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to the Lechuguilla presentations. We are going to get started with our next presenter, who I have the honor to introduce, Emily Davis. She started caving as a freshman in college after going on an outing club trip led by Peter Jones in the late 1960s. In 1991, she gained some unwelcome fame as the fallen woman of Lechuguilla when a loose rock broke her leg and led to one of the most widely covered and logistically complex cave rescues ever in North America. Emily's caving career mostly focuses on project caving and assisting cave-related scientific and conservation projects. Welcome, Emily. Thanks for presenting, and I will turn it over to you now.
Thank you. On March 31st, 1991, I was with a team of 5 checking an upper lead in Fubar. Mike Manser was the team leader. The lead did not pan out, so we were checking any holes in the room that we could see if we had some passage for our 24-hour trip. As I was climbing up out of a hole in the floor, a handhold that I'd used on my way down suddenly popped loose and rolled towards me. I threw myself to the side and slid backward, and the rock landed on my knee. When I put my foot down, I knew we were in big trouble. Dr. Steve Mossberg was a part of the team and climbed down next to me and diagnosed the injury as a tibial plateau fracture. He has X-ray eyes. 4 days later, this would be confirmed. Score 1 for Dr. Steve. The team that I was on had over 100 years of collective caving experience. Mike Manser left immediately with the unfortunate news and a medical shopping list and went to find Dave Jones, who was at the deep sea camp. Sent him out of the cave. Mike also left a note in the passage saying Emily broke her leg and an arrow toward Fubar. He traveled out of the cave over a mile of hilly desert, drove 8 miles of rough dirt road to the Park Service cabins in only 2 hours. Steve splinted my leg and inventoried gear, and we waited. On the surface, they were not sitting still. Within 12 hours, we had stoves, hot food, sleeping bags, and additional painkillers. Darvocet had been provided by Rosano when his team came to check on us, and after finding the note in the passage. The meds became a regular feature as I needed redrugging every 4 hours to make the experience passable. We used Percocet. Steve also was supplied with morphine, but we never needed it. Cave Wench was with Rosano's team and pretty much never left my side until I left for the ambulance. During that first night, she and I sat up and figured out how long the carryout would take. We figured between 3 and 7 days, depending on how long it took to get lots of rope, which made this an important one of the items returned with the, one of the important items that was returned was medical supplies and a catheter. This handy device was used to keep things flowing in more ways than one. Repackaging for a vertical haul after the necessary pee breaks would have taken an enormous amount of time, especially since Steve insisted I keep hydrating. During that night, the crew arrived with that stretcher, and in the AM, we started out. Part of the team was Don Coons. He was my stretcher angel for the entire trip. Teams were sent to rig each obstacle ahead of time. And the first day I was packaged in a sked and then in the Furno, as you can see here. We decided that wasn't necessary, and it was very uncomfortable over the long term. The team's safety was an important concern as well as mine. In addition, every effort was made to prevent damage to the cave. Some of the trails were widened, but we stayed within them as much as possible. The first day of carryout was April 1st. I was surrounded by many long-term friends. They made constant jokes about sending out for pizza and how I should quit kidding and get up and carry my own pack. In fact, Ann Bostad required that all new additions to the carry team provide at least one fresh joke before they could join the team. Keeping a positive attitude was an important part of the well-being of the entire team. We rested that second night at the bottom of the Great White Way. You can see Jim Goodbar and Don Coons, who were the underground coordinators. During that night, the rigging teams worked on the Great White Way for a 250-foot vertical haul. After a short carry, we got into position for the haul. And started up. Unfortunately, the haul had not been tested with a 2-person body weight, and we stopped approximately 10 feet off the floor and hung there for several hours while the system was re-rigged to take more than a 2-foot bite for every reset. When we finally reached the top, it was almost 9 at night, and we made it to EF Junction. We broke here for the night again, and the rigging teams again worked all night long, rigging the traverses above the rift. Now, most cavers don't notice any difficulty with the rift on a normal trip in the cave. It's pretty fast, it's part of the elephant trail, and there's just nothing special about it. But going through the rift with a stretcher required complicated and extensive rigging to keep both the stretcher and the carry team safe. Everyone was clipped in at all times. In some places, the stretcher needed to be passed hand over hand or vertically. Other places, it could be dragged. After 3 days of moving, we reached Glacier Bay. Now, at Glacier Bay, they passed me up, some rope assistance, till we got to the top. You'll notice here that one of the things we did was keep my arms free. I was able to hold ropes, feel semi-useful, and help out by keeping things out of the way. When we got to the top of Glacier Bay, it was late afternoon. And like most trips into Lech, at some point we got entrance fever and decided to keep going. We moved forward to the bottom of Boulder Falls. And even at Boulder Falls, again, areas that we never notice when we're caving in Lechuguilla had to be rigged. The sandy slope below the drop had to be fully rigged. Fairly complicated. Don Coons and I lifted off on Boulder Falls. You'll notice Peter Jones to the right. Peter felt that he had to be there to help get me out, considering the fact that he had taken me in my first cave 20 years before. As I was being hauled up Boulder Falls, I waved at the team below that had been carrying me. Most of the people below would not see me again until out of the cave. There were a few that had gone ahead and climbed Boulder Falls before the team got there, but it would take a while because the normal climbing was being done at Boulder Falls with one person at a time. A new team was at the top of the falls to carry me out. I was later told, as the group looked up, Donald Davis exclaimed, and you can correct me, Donald, if I'm wrong, but this is the rumor that got to me. My God, it's the rising of Our Lady of Lechuguilla. At this point, a normal trip's almost over, but we still had several more rope climbs and the dreaded culvert. In the culvert, nobody could be in the culvert with me. So I had to do chin-ups by grabbing the lip of the pieces of culvert across from me to pull the stretcher away from the ladder so it could be hauled up. At that point, we reached the 90-foot entrance. Our photographers, Ann and Peter Bosted, had switched to black and white film at the request of the park for newspaper pool photography. Was greeted by Andy Kaminsky, a longtime good friend and park ranger, who insisted that I'd put him through far too much and I owed him a bottle of wine. I had no idea that the media coverage was as extensive as it was. I thought it was an exaggeration. But meanwhile, while I was in the hospital, the Northwestern Passage was discovered. And I think Paul said that it was discovered before my accident. I believe that it was after, because my accident occurred on the first day of expedition. And the park allowed people to go back in at the end and continue the expedition while I was in the hospital. I was especially surprised when I saw all of this press material. Some of the headlines were pretty humorous and showed a real lack of understanding of what a cave was and what was going on. I think you'll enjoy a few of these headlines. I was especially surprised by a full page in Shape magazine, considering I was a 40-year-old grungy caver sort. So there I was back at home, and here I am with all of you this weekend. I'm not sure how much time had been spent in pre-planning a rescue in Lechuguilla by the Park Service, but from the stretcher side, it went very smoothly. The fact that 70 people were on expedition at the time of the accident, and one of my team members was a physician, Steve Mossberg, certainly helped. I'll always be thankful to everyone involved and to the greater caving community. I especially appreciated my ladies in waiting, Ann Bosted and Pat Sizer, the spectacular underground coordinators, Jim Goodbar and Don Coons, and the photographers of the rescue, Ann and Peter Bosted, Roland Vineyard, and the film photographer, Tom Zanes. There were 90 people underground and 80 people on the surface, all paid by the Park Service. And the Park Service ran my rescue pretty much like a forest fire, with all of the Park Service personnel that would have been used in a forest fire. And some people ask me, why did this become so big? Why was it such a big press story? Well, first was, I think that the park wanted it to be, because once they found out that there was very little chance that I was going to die and that there would be a positive outcome, they wanted some positive press after the issues they had with the Yellowstone fire the year before. I was a 40-year-old woman, and in the general public, that seemed very weird to them that I would be exploring a cave. Desert Storm had ended 2 weeks before, and the press was pretty slow, and the general public loves a soap opera with a happy ending. Thank you.
Great job, Emily. So, having been with you on that rescue, we don't have any questions yet, so I thought I'd ask you one. The very first day was April the 1st. Did you have any concerns about that?
Well, that was when the group gathered together and decided that I should carry my own pack, and that this was possibly a running joke, and that I had done it solely to be surrounded by half-naked, sweating men. So I think that the group was more concerned about April 1st than I was.
Very true. So do you want to talk a little bit about what's it like to do a cave side chat during the rescue?
So when we reached EF Junction, the press asked for microphones to be set up. We had a full radio set up at that point, and we did a radio talk from EF Junction before we got started that morning. And it was, I found it very amusing when I got out and saw the films of it, because the cameras were aimed at two speakers sitting outside. I insisted with the press that they give me the questions ahead of time because I wanted to be really prepared. One of my major goals personally during the rescue was to come out of it with a whole very positive attitude, and to, if there was press, make sure that the press received a positive view of the caving community, of the camaraderie, of the self-reliance, and the behavior that the caving community consistently has shown in the 50 years I've caved.
Emily, there's a question about how much pain you were in throughout the rescue, and I'm pretty sure they're not talking about the bad jokes.
The knee was painful. The less I moved it, the less pain I had. And we found that Percocet dulled it enough so that it was really not that bad. Every 4 hours, as I said, we needed to re-administer some painkillers. And occasionally when the stretcher was jostled really hard in one direction, I would suck air pretty fast. But one of the things I haven't told many people about, I think Pat knows this, is when we reached the bottom of the entrance drop, I was lying in the stretcher and my back hurt so badly from the amount of time I'd spent in the stretcher that day that I was worried that my knee was not broken, and because my back was far more painful than my knee.
Yes, and I remember when I told you to stand up and jump around, the look you gave me that confirmed it was your leg.
Yes.
One of the things that some people may not have been aware of is we actually had a team in the Far East that had no idea there was a rescue going on.
They apparently came out to the bottom of Boulder Falls and found a whole bunch of gear that had not yet been removed from the cave and could not figure out what was going on until they got out.
And an interesting part of that was there were people in Japan who knew about Emily's rescue long before they did. So Emily,
Oh,
go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, what was one of the more important things that you were able to convey to people after the rescue, to the world?
I think it was the camaraderie, the self-reliance, and the trust that we hold each other in, and the fact that I literally relied on all of the people around me for my life, and have always done so in caving situations where there are trust and necessary movements, rigging, all of that. So that's the major issue that I wanted to bring across to the world. One interesting little piece that we'll bring in, Mike just mentioned, is the fact that 30 years later was the Thai rescue. And one of the things that happened that was interesting was that the New York Times was trying to figure out whether or not the young men in the Thai rescue would survive. And they went back and looked at records and published an article on the 5 most famous successful cave rescues in the world. And mine was the second, I believe. At which point I received enormous numbers of phone calls from all of the various news media that pay attention to what the New York Times say, and did a bunch of interviews about the Thai rescue tied to my rescue. which was kind of interesting. I had a very dear friend who said to me that I would never live down my rescue. He is long gone, but I'm still being asked about the rescue.
You want to talk about your first trip back into the cave after the rescue?
1 year after the rescue, almost to the day, I went with Diana Northup on a trip. It was during the time that the cave was closed to exploration, and we were doing a sampling trip with a couple of Australians and Diana and myself, and we were taking sampling near places where people had rubbed sweaty bodies on rocks, and near camps, and trying to figure out whether or not the non-indigenous species of bacteria were affecting the indigenous species of bacteria. And Diana can explain it far better than I can. I just know that I was very pleased to be back in the cave and doing science, which I love to do, and assisting Diana, which I love to do. And we were up at 10 o'clock at night, swabbing rocks and filling test tubes with samples. So it was a great trip.
And what's the story about the anniversary passage?
I actually don't know.
Oh, all right. Well, that was something Rod brought up.
Well, I'm not sure, Rod, where that came from, because the trip that I went back on was a science trip, not a exploration mapping trip.
Anything else you'd like to add, Emily?
I think that I'm good. I just, again, I love seeing the pictures of the various folks after the rescue and some of the comments. One of the comments, I believe by Don Coons, who'd had a couple of beers after he got out, when he was asked by Bryant Gumbel why we got out more quickly than expected. Don said something like, because we knew what we were doing. And at one point, Brian Gumbel asked whether or not we had enough air, food, and water. And I think it was, pardon?
It was Kerbo, wasn't it?
It was Ron Kerbo said they have enough food and water. So I think it was, we all kept our sense of humor. And I think that made it pretty comfortable for everyone involved.
Do you have any words of advice for anyone who spends time in a litter for an extended period of time?
Get a good lumbar pad and keep your sense of humor. Surround yourself with, make sure that you have people around you who know you well enough to keep you laughing. And just remember, you're there because you wanted to be.
I heard you lost your boot. Did you ever get it back?
No, I think it finally got removed from the cave, but I think at that point it was a bit moldy, and I don't think they wanted it in the visitor center in a glass case.
All right. Well, thanks very much, Emily. It's nice seeing you, and it's nice to hear your story. And hopefully you won't have to continue reliving it.